Hello, I'm Jim Merritt, and I'm here today with Bruce Beveridge, and we're going to talk about the animals that live in the Barnegat Bay Estuary. We're going to home in on some specifics that we deal with Reclaim the Bay. We're going to talk exclusively today about mollusks, and we'll tell you what those are and show you some different kinds of mollusks. And so we're going to start out with the first group that are called bivalves, two shells. And we're going to start with clams. And Bruce can tell us a lot about clams because he has a website that really deals with all kinds of mollusks and different types of shellfish.
Okay, well, the clams that we see up here are three different types. On the left-hand side is the hard clam. That's the one that most folks are used to buying, eating, and clamming for. They have two shells. They get to be various sizes. The first, what most people get are called little necks, and they're about 1.5 inches. They're the most tender. As they get bigger, they turn into a top neck, then a cherry stone, and a chowder clam. Chowder clams can get up to be about 6 inches and are very tough. So you cut them up and put them in chowder. Now, what they do is they dig into the sand or mud, and they just sit there with the siphons up, and they filter feed. A hard clam can filter about 5 gallons of water a day. On the right-hand side, that is a surf clam. A little bit different environment. They're not really found in the bay. They're found in the ocean. They like the higher salinity, but the same process. They dig in the sand, they filter, and they were basically the principal ingredient for Campbell's clam chowder. As the climate got warmer, they kind of moved up towards New England, but they're still out there. In the middle, all right, is what's called a soft shell clam. People know them as steamers, Ipswich clams. They live in sand. They dig down pretty deep. They go down to up to 8 inches. So that siphon, as you can see on the left-hand side of this clam, actually sticks out up to 8 inches. When they're frightened, they squirt out water, trying to get as much of themselves into the shell as they can, and that's where their name comes from. Also, that's not a good thing because it gives their location away to predators. All right, so as we move on to other mollusks or bivalves, on the left you see a razor clam or Atlantic jackknife clam. These are long, slender clams, supposedly the best eating in the bay. And in the middle is a clam called the stout taglius, or sometimes called the stout razor clam. Again, these are different species. They're filter feeders. They do the same thing. And the fella on the right there is called a blood arc. And it's kind of in a family of arc clams. They're kind of thick-shelled and rounded. They have what you see, that's the outer layer of the shell. All these shells have an outer layer, but this is more pronounced. And if you actually cut this open, you will it's looking like you're got a cup of Heinz ketchup in there. It's blood red. And that's because their blood, unlike the other clams, which is clear, is red. They have hemoglobin in it. So they're kind of prized by as a Chinese delicacy.
I was just going to ask about that, Bruce, because I've never seen those clams, and I've done a lot of clamming, so that must be much rarer than the other clams that you've been talking about.
They are.
So here's another kind of a mollusk, also a bivalve, two shells, an oyster, and I think that looks very different. And you have a single one on the left and a group of them on the right. What's that all about?
Well, the oysters are a bivalve. They're, of course, a different species, but what they do is their shell is not regular, but their shells are symmetrical. In other words, the top is the same as the bottom. Where these shells, they just grow out. There's no pattern to them. They just grow. Oysters are pretty much a staple in the bay now, where they have been destroyed by disease over the years, but due to farming and conservation, they're coming back. Now, what you see on the left is a single oyster. What you see on the right is what they call an oyster reef. So oysters, unlike clams, do not dig into the bay. What they do is they have to, when their larvae metamorphosize into an oyster, they drop, and then they can move around a little, and then they'll find a place they need to cement themselves to, basically for life. And there's just a lot of oysters in there. New oysters will form onto that. The reef will build up. But the other thing is, it's an environment. All right. So a lot of little fish, crustaceans, other types of things live in there. Another quality is these are, if they're on the shore, they are permanent. So they can become part of a living shoreline, a base for a living shoreline. So as the oyster reef grows, the shoreline can grow. And that helps prevent erosion, which is kind of a big topic these days. So
wow, that's really an important animal, and it increases the diversity. It's a great habitat for all kinds of other animals. It stabilizes shorelines. It filters water. These are important critters in the bay. Glad we have them.
And commercially, they're very well used, and they're cultivated by farmers now. Oyster farmers are raising them.
Not to mention that they're delicious. But of all things to eat, here's one of my favorites, the scallop. I really, really love scallops. And scallops live in the bay too, but I think they also live in the ocean. Is that correct?
Right. The one on the right is a bay scallop, and they're in the bay. The scallop on the left is a sea scallop. They're found in the ocean. So as they're harvested, and what you basically are eating is the mussel, all right, from the scallop itself. So the sea scallop is maybe about, I don't know, 5 inches wide, and the mussel that you get is maybe the size of a $50. So that's what you're buying in the store. The thing about the scallops, all right, let's go to the bay scallop on the right. What you see there that looks like hair or a mist, those are cilia. And what they are hair-like structures that basically wave, and that's what brings the seawater or bay water into the scallop so they can do their filter feeding. And same thing on the sea scallop. The little dots you see there are what they call eyes. They're actually light sensing organs. And a little joke we used to have, the one, if there's 20 on top and 20 on the bottom, the bay scallop would have 20/20 vision. They're really not true eyes, but what they do is they sense light. So if a predator like a crab or something was coming towards them, they would know that they're in danger, and then they could swim away. Oh yeah,
swim away? How do they do that?
Swim away. Well, what they'll do is they will seal the front of the shell, so where the cilia is, that will basically seal off. And the picture on the lower right, if you look at the back of the shell, where the hinge is, there's an opening. So as the front seal's shut, it shoots water out of the back, and they can kind of jet propel themselves away from where they are, away from their enemy, and move on.
So they
scallop
actually
shellfish.
move as compared to clams and oysters, which don't move. Well, oysters don't move at all, and clams move only a little. So
Clams can
another kind
crawl,
of
yeah.
shellfish in Barnegat Bay and in the ocean are mussels. Now I know I've eaten mussels, one of my favorite foods, but what are the difference between these two?
Well, the mussel on the left is called a blue mussel, and they are food, a food source that you can buy in the store. Mussels marinara, all kinds of delicious meals you can make with them. And what they do is they have what they call byssal threads, all right, or sometimes they're known as beards. But what they do is they hang on to rocks or other items and just kind of sit in the ocean, open up, and the clean water comes in, and that's how they feed. They have siphons and a mussel that can open and shut. Now, when the tide goes out, they take the water and they seal themselves shut. And then when the tide comes back, they open up and start filter feeding again. Now, the mussel on the right is called a rib mussel. As far as being desirable to eat, the jury's still out on that one. Some people still eat them, but they're not very tasty. And again, they live on the shoreline or in the marsh. And when the tide goes out, they close up. And that's when people can harvest them. They're fairly easy to harvest, more than the blue mussel.
Are
So
they
if you
also
have a
called
whole,
bank mussels?
they're called bank mussels. There's a lot of, all these things have so many different
Oh,
names.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. But when they take them home and cook them, they've been closed up. And depending on the water that they're in, it could be, could be oil from a boat going by. They're not as tasty as the blue mussel, and there's more of a chance of getting sick or not feeling very well after you eat them. But, well, the other thing too about the rib mussel is, like the oyster that helps to build the living shoreline, these rib mussels have their byssal threads and they attach to reeds or phragmites or anything on the shore, and they help to stabilize the shoreline, just like the oysters. Well, not just like, but like the oysters do. And so that helps keep erosion away.
I'm going to talk about gastropods, and I see you have a moon snail here. How is that how
Yeah,
is that different than a bivalve?
well, they only have one shell, so they're a univalve, as they're
Okay.
sometimes called. Uh, and people get them when they're clamming. We'll tell you why in a second. They have, if you look at the one on the right, they have a big foot that they expand and crawl across the bottom of the bay, and they're hunting for clams. So as the moon snail goes underneath the bottom, they are nocturnal, and what it'll do is it'll grab a clam in its foot, and as it's doing that, it will secrete a little bit of acid from its mouth on the upper portion of the clam, and in its mouth is something called a radula. This is common to all snails. It's a tongue-like aperture, but it has these sharp barbs on it. So as the moon snail sticks the radula out and draws it back, it's scraping. And so it'll sit there for hours, just scraping, 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 until you get what you find on the beach and might not have been able to identify it or who did it. This is a moon snail hole.
Wow.
So as
I
you can
always thought
kind of
somebody drilled
see,
a hole in the shell for hanging on a necklace or something.
basically a hole in the upper part of the shell that the moon snail can have access to the internal organs of the clam. So it can do a couple things. It can stick its mouth in there, and like everybody normally thinks, it just sucks out the clam. But more times than not, what it'll do is it'll stick its mouth in there, find the heart, pierce the heart, and the clam will die. And when clams die, they're spring loaded open. And that the moon snail and everybody else in the area can have a seafood buffet.
Look how different these whelks look than the other gastropods, than the moon snails. It's incredible.
Right.
These are two different kinds of whelks, aren't they?
These are the one on the left is a channeled whelk, and the one on the right is a knobbed whelk. The knobbed whelk just happens to be the New Jersey state shell. So whelks are gastropods. They crawl along the bottom. They'll eat a number of different things, but they can also do clams. And what they'll do when they find a clam is they'll hold the clam in the foot, and they'll use the side of the shell to bash them open. So when you find whelks, generally the edge of their shell is jagged or ragged, and that's one way they eat clams. So we talked about the knobbed whelk. Again, the one on the left is called a channeled whelk. They're the same MO. They both crawl underneath the bottom, find a clam or other food, and use the side of the shell to bash it open. So the two different types of shells in the bay. Maybe worth mentioning is there's another type of whelk mostly associated with the southern waters like Florida, lightning whelk. It is in the New Jersey register now because New Jersey is the northern end of the lightning whelks range, and some of them have been found in the bay. So not as common as these two. Just a little footnote on the whelks. They're also sometimes associated as conchs, and they are harvested in New Jersey to contribute to scungili, or canned conch. So they are a food source for humans too.
So we've looked at several different kinds of mollusks. These, of course, are all shellfish, live in the Barnegat Bay Estuary, and we've compared some of them, and now we know about the diversity, the difference in these animal species, and how important that is. And in future videos, we'll learn more about specifics of these. But the important thing right now is to just think about how this incredible diversity in Barnegat Bay contributes to its health, the health of the water and the other animals that are living in it. Wow, amazing diversity. Bruce, thanks. It was great having looking at all these different shells and these different animals, and we'll get some more specifics about some of them in future videos, I'm sure.
It's been my pleasure to talk to everybody out there.